going from department to department, going from the ER, labor and delivery, going, wound care all around the hospital, and getting all different points of view and seeing what their challenges were, but also knowing that there was a horizontal link between those departments and how they needed to work with sterile processing.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with the frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal to help you fight dirty. Every instrument, every time. Whether you are tuning in for education or inspiration, we're wicked glad you did. Now, turn on those washes and turn up the volume. It's time to go Beyond Clean.
This week on Beyond Clean, we speak with Brett Norton, VP of Operations here at Beyond Clean, and Hank. Brett joined the team earlier this year, and as we do with all the new additions to the team, we bring him on for an interview and put him on the spot. And we ask really hard questions and put him in uncomfortable positions. Now, this is going to be a great one because Brett comes really from a family of healthcare practitioners, and then also from his personal experience in the sales and marketing and in a number of different areas, but most recently, obviously, in the sterile processing space. And we're going to be talking about a common theme for us on this show, which is education, but we're going to put a new spin on it. And we're really going to get a vendor's perspective who really comes from industry on the value of that education and how to do it right.
I really love these interviews, Justin, because it kind of gives some public confirmation to everyone out there that we've hired the right people for the job. Every single one of these that we've done. When we interviewed Lindsay Brown, when we interviewed Adam Okada, when we interviewed Lisa McCown, again and again and again, we just have these terrific interviews with all kinds of insight. And it's very evident that each and every one of these folks love sterile processing. They have their own passion and their own drive inside themselves, right? Prior to coming on to Beyond Clean, but they brought all that with them. And I hope folks out there in the industry realize that many of their vendor partners out there have that same kind of passion and drive. You may not know it if you haven't asked them about it or if they haven't got a chance to go on a podcast and talk about it, for half an hour, but it's there. And I hope throughout this interview and throughout the discussion that you'll be thinking about how can I get to know my vendor partners more? And I think there's going to be some themes that come up in this conversation today that will give you maybe an excuse to ask some more questions of your vendors or take them out for coffee and tell them a little bit more about yourself and about your department and about your processes. So this is going to be a unique show, and I hope there's going to be some unique takeaways as well. So definitely hang with us here throughout the entire interview, okay?
All right, stay tuned. Brett Norton coming up next on Beyond Clean. I'm Justin Poulin.
And I'm Hank Balch.
From 17 Studios, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
This week on Beyond Clean, we're speaking with Brett Norton, VP of Operations here at Beyond Clean. And Brett, as we love to do with all of our new additions to the team, I'd like to get them on for an interview during the season. So very glad to have you on the team to introduce you to the audience and to get to know a little bit more about your thoughts and feelings on education today. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, guys, thanks for having me. It's been a a whirlwind these past few months, but it's been awesome. So I'm really happy to be on the team and enjoying the ride. So it's been great.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you about this from the vendor sort of side of the equation, which I spent many years as, not only educating myself as a vendor on the industry and getting some pretty excellent mentorship from many different individuals. And that is ongoing even today with Hank and other members of the team, but also to have you on that same kind of side of the table and having been a vendor and really talking about why vendor education is also so critical. So why don't we just have you talk a little bit about your experience in sales and marketing as a vendor before joining Beyond Clean, before we dive into the interview today?
Yeah, for sure. I think, it can start way, way back. I've been involved in sales and marketing for a long, long time, almost 19 years on the marketing side, and, sales, program managing on the retail end of things. So I've seen the entire spectrum of sales, so to speak. It's been, a learning experience, seeing it from that side and seeing the engagement with just a retail side of things. But then moving into the healthcare side, first and foremost, it was brought on by passion. I've always wanted to be part of, the industry. My dad's a doctor. My mom's a dietitian. My brother's a PA. My sister's a practicing physician. So, that passion came into this whole desire to be part of this sales side and the vendor side. And yeah, it was interesting to get going into the field, but then also at the same time, utilizing that passion and belief in patient care and patient safety really helped springboard me into, I would say, a different echelon, so to speak, as far as, sales is concerned, and just finding new and creative ways to work with clinicians and come up with solutions that benefit the industry and benefit our patients.
Brett, I've had a couple of friends in sterile processing that have gone to the dark side, as we all like to say, and began working for various vendors. And I've got one example in particular, a couple of guys got some jobs with Carl Stores. I know the feedback after the first couple of weeks of orientation for them was I had no idea how much stuff that Stores did, like how many different models of scopes they had. They were really overwhelmed with the scope of products and services, pardon the pun there. But it kind of made me curious, and I want to pick your brain on this. As you got into healthcare marketing and sales in particular, how did you go about learning your products and your product catalog? Because I'm assuming that's important for selling into the space, is knowing what it is that you're selling. But what did that process look like for you?
Yeah, it was interesting because I think a lot of companies take the approach of sitting through, a sales orientation and product orientation with one of the educated professionals in the company. And that was no different for me. I also was tasked with reading through fact sheets and brochures and watching videos. And of course, I got a baseline understanding of the products, but I think when it comes to product knowledge and understanding, it really has to come from the side of the customer and the end user. And I really didn't start gaining an understanding of those products until I was physically in the hospitals and working with sterile processing technicians, listening to their questions, because you really can't understand what they're going through until you hear what their challenges and get their questions. And, those aren't put through on a brochure or a fact sheet or anything like that. So, and then just seeing where the products are used, say, I was on the chemical side and there was use in the sinks, there was use in the ultrasonics, the washers, and then, of course, pre-treatment, and knowing what they're used for really helps you understand what the product is and does, and then you can actually apply it. And I think that's how I learned all the products that much better. And I was able to educate the sterile processing professionals, nurse teams, even some of the surgeons that I came in contact with, just much better from that point of view.
I'm going to ask you to pretend like a psychologist or psychiatrist, depending on what end of the spectrum we end up here.
Hold on, that's my job, Hank.
Yeah, that's right. But we don't pay you for that, Justin. So I get bad advice all the time. No, on the personality spectrum for vendors, obviously there's folks that come in from all sides, and there's all different kinds of people that become vendors and are trying to sell things into the sterile processing space. In your experience, and maybe from your professional opinion as an amateur psychologist, what kind of personality does it take to do what you described well, to really jump in and say, I need to understand the depth and breadth of these products and services beyond the brochure? Like, what kind of person is that? What drives that type of vendor?
I think it all comes around to the patient, and knowing that we are in this business to save lives and to have safe patient outcomes when it comes to sterilizing instruments and cleaning instruments and educating our clinicians. And so I think you really need to have that passion first and foremost. And my opinion is you need to be relatable. I've never felt that I talk down to any of the sterile processing techs or managers or directors that I worked with, or any of the nurses, because, they don't always know the answers. They don't know your products. And so it's really our job to educate them and to work with them on a level playing field to where, you're also learning from them. Like I said earlier, you're learning what they go through on a daily basis, what their challenges are. And I really do feel that you need to have that understanding and that passion, that relatable personality. I've seen all kinds. I know you guys have too. There's the sales associate that is money driven, and most sales pros are, but you're not going to get the sale if you're not relatable, or if you're not likable, and if you're not working in tandem with the end goal, which is the patient, and understanding that that's what our job really is. Yeah. So in my psychological point of view, that's the way I see it. That's the way I view it.
So I think one of the things that you're describing is that you want to provide some level of value, not just get your product in the door, but I think making yourself a resource is really important. But I want to take this to really the next kind of stage of all of that. And you described about meeting with people, getting out into the field, talking to surgeons, talking to nurses, talking to sterile processing, and gaining a understanding, not just from one perspective, but from multiple perspectives within the facility. And I want to just kind of take that to, okay, that's one way to provide value. Your product, you're getting in front of people, you're consulting, you're educating them, you're becoming a resource in your particular area of focus of maybe the product or solution that's being sold. But what about the reverse of that? What kind of value or impact is there coming back the other way as you're out there in the field and really asking good questions and engaging the end users and getting their feedback? What kind of value does that then bring back to the vendor, not only just in making sure that their product is sort of, solving the right problems, but also just in your own understanding? Because you mentioned, I'm not a clinician. I just play one on TV. No, my family plays one on TV. No, my family are real clinicians, and your understanding is from a completely different perspective. It's from the manufacturer side. So how did talking to them change how you viewed your own product?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think I can give you an example of being in a facility in South Dakota and going from department to department, going from the ER, labor and delivery, going, wound care all around the hospital, and getting all different points of view and seeing what their challenges were, but also knowing that there was a horizontal link between those departments and how they needed to work with sterile processing. And I took a lot of that back to, the manufacturer side and said, these are questions and challenges that we should be answering with maybe webinars or educational materials. We can improve our labeling, our presentation on how we are training our clinicians to use the products. There are so many benefits to actually being in the field and working hand to hand with all of, these professionals, because you can't understand how they're going to use it. You can maybe assume. A simple example would be pre-treatment and just spraying instruments. And actually, you can have it on a label, but they're not going to, a lot of times they're not going to read the label. So how are you going to simplify that process? What are you going to do to make their job easier? And that comes through field sales and actually being out there and working with them.
And so, Brett, I'm assuming that you've had a number of experiences in the field like this that you described that have been successful, and potentially some that didn't quite land as well. Maybe some where if you could do it all over again, you would have done things differently, said things differently, etc. Let's kind of flesh those out a little bit and maybe start with the key to successfully landing those punches, if you will, for that analogy, in the field as a vendor. Like, what needs to happen for that event or that education or that conversation to be successful?
Well, I think the first one that comes to mind is to be on time if you have an appointment.
Good point. Okay. Yeah, that's good low-hanging fruit. All right, continue. Yeah. I'm tracking with you.
By the way, if you ever want to hear it, I have a great story about being late.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a good example. I had an appointment with a sterile processing manager up in Fort Collins and here in Colorado. And it was a great opportunity to present some pre-treatment formula options and also some detergent options and give a full department presentation and education. And it was scheduled around their morning huddle. And I was late and I missed the boat on that whole chance, that opportunity, and I never got back in the door. So I think that's probably one of the number one things I would point out is to make sure that you're respecting and valuing their time, because it's very valuable. They don't have a lot of time. And to get them in the same room and, to Justin's point, to provide that value to them as a vendor, education wise, is really something that you just can't miss out on. So right. That one is the low-hanging fruit there.
I want to follow up on that, Brett, because the being on time, that's so transferable to everything, right? Like technicians, you should be on time. Managers, you should be on time to your own meetings. Everyone should be on time to the huddles, not just the vendors, but the staff as well. We could do a whole nother interview on just the importance of being on time in life and in sterile processing. But, once you're there, because I know that you've probably got some other valuable insights to add here, but you arrive on time, you've got that opportunity in front of you. What should you get out of it as the vendor? Like, what do you, absent the sale, right? Like, we all know that vendors want to make the sale or continue that relationship, whatever that opportunity is for that visit. But outside of those kind of things, what do you get out of it to know that, yes, this was a successful use of my time and education?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the things that I always did was go into the departments and see what they were challenged with, ask them what were the issues that they were facing during that specific day. What did they run into that week? There were a lot of times where I would be in hospitals where they would be in the front end of a joint commission visit. So there was a lot of stress involved, and being a resource to actually go in there and understand what they were dealing with. Because it's not easy, as you both know, when you're in a busy sterile processing department, a busy OR, a busy hospital, the volume is very overwhelming, and it throws people for a huge loop, minute to minute, hour to hour. It is very challenging. And I think, to your question, Hank, to be in that space and to understand, what they physically go through on a daily basis is invaluable, because you can tailor your programs around that to what can I do to make their job easier? What can I do to ensure that all departments are following processes on pre-treatment so that the trays are coming down to sterile processing and there's no question on if these instruments are adequately treated and ready to pop into the sink. I think it's those simple, just looking at what is happening on, a challenging front and just figuring out the ways to come up with solutions for them.
I mean, it seems almost so basic that you shouldn't have to say it, but maybe to summarize that story is a vendor should come out of the department knowing more about the process in the department and how the product is used than they knew coming in. And if you accomplish that, and you have asked the right questions, or you have listened to the right comments, or you've seen the right things, like that is mission accomplished. If you're able to accomplish that because you come out with more insight and more strategy to then for that next department add even more value. And then it just continues, or it should continue to snowball from there, right? To flip that question though, from the user side of things, as a vendor coming in, again, presenting education, what are you hoping that users get out of it? Is it as simple as, oh yeah, that was a good reminder that there is a label on this bottle that I should probably read? Like, is that the bottom of the totem pole? Like, as long as I can get them to look at the label for a second time, then it's well worth my time. Or are you looking for more out of those opportunities?
Yeah, I think, there are a lot of learning opportunities for the user. I think it's important to have an understanding of national standards, guidelines like AAMI, to provide some of that insight if you can. There's always the elephant in the room, which is the IFU. You'll see, as you both know, you go into sterile processing departments and you see multiple IFUs taped or, up on a board. And it's something to where I've used the opportunity to actually say, okay, what are the similarities here? What can I help you with? Maybe I've seen something or a challenge that I've addressed in previous visits that, we can look at here. I think, yes, you can talk about your product, but I think it's also about process improvements and things that you may have seen in other hospitals. One is very simple. There was a joint commission came into a hospital that I was at, and they first thing they saw was chemical canisters that were on the floor with no spill containers or anything like that. And the hospital immediately ordered some spill containers. And that was one of the first things I started doing when I would go to hospitals. I would say, hey, Joint Commission is looking for this. You guys should probably implement this process. And I would give them a link. It wasn't a sale for me, but it was a process improvement to help them and their department, which also developed trust in me as a vendor and really just, it was just something all the way around to where you're working together. Of course you want the sale, but I want the department to function. So
that's a key part of that value piece, what you just described. They're working within one culture. They're working underneath one manager. They're working underneath an established system. And so I think being that resource to connect what's happening in the industry to other industry resources is pretty critical. And I'll even add a couple of others that I think users should get out of it is simple takeaways. Like it should be very clear what the important information was that they need to be remembering so that it's memorable. And another thing I think that is a nice bonus is if they get some inspiration and, they get something that reinvigorates them to go through that day with a little extra attention to something that not necessarily that they were all complacent about. Just sometimes focus gets shifted all over the place, right? Squirrel. It happens all the time in this industry. And what vendors should get out of it also is the attention of the department. How many times have you gone in, and they're just there for the CEs, they're checking off the box, they're half asleep, yeah, you can take that on to an extent in terms of how well you deliver education, and you can kind of own whether or not you can flip that script. But I think if a vendor is going to come in and do education, they should get some attention. So I think there's a lot of just little nuances to, what successful education is like, but it's just like everything else. It's a partnership. And a lot of times that partnership includes helping them make sure that they're using your product correctly. How many times have you gone in and they're saying, oh, this doesn't work or this is horrible or whatever. And the truth is they got a million things on their plate. Maybe they didn't read the IFU. Maybe they didn't need maybe the IFU wouldn't have solved their problem. And you just are going in to sort of make sure that everybody's centered on how to best make use of that product so that they are successful with those processes, as you just said, Brett. And, to that end, I'd like to know a little bit of behind the scenes from your perspective on when some of the questions that a user has about products and services, if they want to get those questions answered. I don't think it's one size fits all, but a lot of times going on the website or trying to figure it out for themselves, that can be kind of a time consuming effort. So what's the best way to kind of go about that? Is it calling somebody, calling your local rep, calling the company, sending emails, submitting a form on a website?
What about posting a public post on social media with your question in front of the whole world? Does that get the attention, Brett?
Yeah, it has. I know I've had to answer a couple of those. You basically put me on the spot on a couple of those in the past.
Great.
Yeah, I think I like the personal approach. The emails can get lost, the forms can get lost on a website. In this day and age, of course, we've got now with COVID starting to dissipate, I think we have the ability to have the local reps in the facilities doing better, more in service. But, if that can't happen and if you need more immediate answers, we've got technology, right? We're in the age of webinars now. And I think when you can actually present to somebody in person, like we do at Beyond Clean, with our virtual conferences, I think, and I've done that too on the vendor side. I've actually done product presentations with people across the country, people in other countries, and really have bridged that gap as far as helping with the product understanding. Phone calls are great too, but, emails and, combing through websites and sending over PDFs and brochures, it's just asking a lot of the customer. And especially when you're working with clinicians who don't have much time, you really want to be a resource that makes it, as we've said earlier, easy on them as possible, and to give them that direct attention and making them feel as if that they are an important part of your process and your growth. Your growth is their growth. And that's the way I see it.
What a great setup or segue, Brett, into everything that we talk about, the value of social media, particularly for these individual vendors and reps to build a personal brand of trust that's visible, that their name is known, that their face is known, that folks know if I've got a question about this product line, this is the person that I want to go ask. Not the website, to your point, not some anonymous info at, but they know that if I've got a chemical question, I want to talk to Brett, or if I've got a loaner question, I want to talk to Jeff, or if I got a water question, I want to talk to Jonathan. To give a little, selfish plug, Beyond Clean has a terrific series where we highlight subject matter experts in the sterile processing industry called the Expert Series. That's exactly what that's doing, is making that personal connection with a name, with a face, and with insight and value, just like what you're saying, to position that person as the go-to resource. And it doesn't have to be at that like big national level as the national subject matter expert. Like if you've got a territory of a state or a couple of states, utilize social media and make your presence known and your contact information known. And wouldn't you know, when folks start having questions about that, they're going to come to you instead of what often happens is they go to Facebook in general and ask the question, and it's being answered by everyone except for the manufacturer, who probably has the most information about that topic. So anyways, that's my soapbox there, Brett. To start kind of wrapping up on this conversation, because we've covered a ton here, and I'm hoping both on the vendor side of things, there's going to be vendors listening to this that are like, oh man, I'm not doing that, but I probably should be doing that, or I should start doing that tomorrow. And on the user side as well, like both you and Justin had some great points about what is the expectation, what's a reasonable expectation for paying attention and for giving honest feedback about products and services. Like we didn't really cover that in this interview, but I know as a user, your personality kind of depends on how much you're going to share. Like some people just never want to act like there's any problems or anything bad is going wrong. And so they never really tell the vendor to their face that, hey, we're having a challenge. It's not really working. I'm not happy with it. Like some managers, like they will just lay it out. But I know there's other folks out there that act like everything's fine until you leave, and then they switch the product on you and like, what the hell has just happened? Right. But to that reasonable expectation, I did want to ask you a question on how much is reasonable for sterile processing technicians and department leaders to expect their reps to know about everything sterile processing. Like you do expect your rep to know about their product, and we covered that at the beginning, but should we be looking at all these reps as industry resources who can help us in general with the processes in our departments? Is that asking too much of them? Kind of where do you sit in that spectrum? Your personal opinion.
Well, I like to look at it from my perspective as knowing as much about the process as possible and being able to offer solutions, whether it's product related or not. I don't think it needs to be that in depth, but, I do believe that vendors need to know who they're selling into and what processes their products, affect, and what processes their products contribute to. And you really can't, it's hard to sell into, I think, any spectrum, healthcare, retail, anywhere, unless you understand the customer, the processes. And, I think especially in sterile processing, when I first got in there, it was eye-opening because, as you know, Hank, it can be chaotic. And seeing it firsthand, knowing what they deal with. I was in one sterile processing department one time. There was, I think, 15 case carts stacked, and they couldn't even shut the elevator. And, it was just case after case after case coming down. And so from the vendor standpoint, I really believe that it's incredibly crucial and important to understand all of those processes and what what it entails. You may be selling just a wash or disinfector or an ultrasonic, but what part of that process plays into where does the ultrasonic fall? Where does the washer fall? There's a lot of manual cleaning involved prior to those processes. So you just need to understand all of that. And the more you understand it, the better you'll be. And the more you can offer solutions, you can offer education to where you are seen as somebody that's a resource and not just somebody that's looking for a sale. They trust you. They believe in you. And I've said in a previous post, I think you guys saw it. It's all about listening and hearing what they really are dealing with, their concerns, listening to their questions, whether, a lot of these questions can be unexpected, but you need to listen. And once you listen, that you can take in the valuable information and then you can utilize it as an educational piece and just be a better vendor in general.
Yeah, I think it's critical. I think you should expect it of yourself. If you want to be successful selling into sterile processing, you don't have to be an expert on everything, and you need to have some skills around how you deal with, hey, that's a little bit outside. I know where I can get the information, or I know an SME that I can ask, and being comfortable not knowing everything. And I think that's where a lot of people fail, is they don't even want to get in front of the departments and do any education because they're afraid they'll be exposed as a fraud because they don't really have that bigger picture. And all they really need to do is understand the big picture enough to know where their limitations are, what their role is, and then they can, be comfortable doing the follow up. I think it's super critical. I don't know how you can sell a product if you look at a product or a solution as a chapter in a book. How can you sell that product if you don't know the other chapters? You don't even know the whole story. You just know what happens in this one part. And oh, by the way, there's a big plot twist at the end that you didn't expect. And so I feel like that's a major mistake. You should familiarize yourself with everything. But the reason I described it that way is really our last question for you, Brett, which is, I know a lot of vendors who are incredibly uncomfortable dealing with learning education, delivering education. They want somebody else in the organization to be the educator, who preferably has clinical experience that they can hand that off to. And not a lot of companies, have that resource. And so in many cases, it winds up being a pretty significant gap, out in the field from an educational standpoint for that vendor. And it definitely hurts their market position. And so what would you say to those vendors out there, that really care about SPD, but might be a little insecure about delivering that education? Like, what's going to put them over the tipping point to really gain enough confidence that they have value to bring in expertise around their product, that if they could learn the context to a certain degree, that they would be able to in-service and educate and be that next level, that next step up kind of a vendor rep and providing the types of value that we talked about today?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing you would think about would be certifications, right? But, that takes a lot of time. Of course, I was looking towards that as well, and I still am, but COVID put a little bit of a hold on that when I was on the vendor side. So I think, there are so many educational opportunities out there. I mean, I'm going to throw in a Beyond Clean plug here. We have countless events and webinars and conferences, and even if it's not directed at vendors, I think it's even more important for a vendor to sit through an educational conference that is offering CE for nurse clinician teams, sterile processing techs. I think listening to the themes and the topics and the discussions are going to give you a real advantage on talking to these professionals and working with them on a on a level where you can all understand each other and you can actually work together for a common goal. There's too many resources out there not to utilize them. And it doesn't take too long to sit through an hour-long webinar. Of course, there's everything nowadays is recorded on demand, so you can always go back in and grab more educational material. But I think it's taking the time on your own to educate yourself. And a lot of these manufacturers really should start to institute that, in my opinion, to require their vendors to sit through some of these educational sessions. I know some of them do, but it really should be a certifiable, approach to keeping them up to speed on the industry itself, because as we know, it is changing rapidly and it's not going to slow down. The technology is changing. The processes are changing. Amy is coming out with new standards this fall. I think when all of that comes into play, things are going to change. And so you really need to make sure that you're educated and just keeping tabs on what is coming through the pipeline.
Yeah, there's so many people out there willing to do it for free, to be a resource, who really care about this industry. And if you get involved, you can make those connections. And in an area that you don't have expertise in, you can fill in those gaps pretty easily with just a little extra effort. Brett, great job on the interview. Welcome aboard. I'm glad we gave you your official Beyond Clean interview, and you had some really good insights from the vendor perspective today. So thanks again for coming on.
Thanks, guys. It was a pleasure. We'll see you soon.
That was Brett Norton, VP of Operations here at Beyond Clean, with his inaugural interview. Actually, no, we did a vendor spotlight with Brett back when he was on the vendor side, and his perspective on really vendor education from the vendor's perspective. We've talked about this before, Hank, but we've always talked about it really from just one side of the equation. What should we expect from vendors when they're educating? And we've talked to vendors in the past too, but there was a key element in this that you brought up, and I think it was right in the middle, the meat and potatoes, where you actually asked the question, what should vendors get out of it as well? And there's a mutual respect that if we want good quality education in the industry, that, both parties play a role in that being successful. There's nothing more frustrating than going to do an education for a department and they're not there, or they only, give you one or two people to talk to, and you drove halfway across the state to come and do that, or you just got a hotel and got up at 5 a.m. and then they really just didn't respect your time. That's very disappointing. And then on the other hand, there's nothing like a department securing all that staff and having them come in. And then there's a vendor who is disinterested in delivering the education. I'm only here to do it because my company makes me. And so, there has to be a commitment from both sides of the table on this to get true value out of vendor education, period, the end.
I want to pick up on something that Brett said toward the end, that, it's so important, but that point about education, and I've talked about this before and I've written about it before, but we kind of conflate continuing education that's approved with education in general, with just like knowledge and insight and perspective. And there's so much information out there that departments can offer their vendors that may not be CE approved education, but man, it is an education. Justin, I think you've told the story even a couple of times that when you first got into the vendor side, you had a department manager take you under her wing. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll even I'll throw a little credit her way. Tanya Zahner. Absolutely. She was integral to my development.
But yeah, such a huge value that gives to our vendor partners that actually make them better. And, for you, who knows where you would have ended up if you didn't have someone at the beginning say, hey, let me show you and teach you everything that I think you should know about this department, about these processes. there may not be a Beyond Clean podcast if there wasn't a Tanya Zahner out there who said, come alongside and let's learn together. So yeah, there's just all kinds of huge value and impact that's out there. And I really want to encourage users, especially, to be that resource for their vendors so that they can get that resource back from their vendors.
So, Hank, I really do want to tell my late story, but I think you identified a great topic for a future episode, the importance of being on time.
Let's do that.
And schedule management, because I will say, to tee that future episode up, that once you get good at this, you become somebody that's in demand. And all of a sudden, if you're really passionate about giving that value, your schedule gets totally run over by a truck and meeting all of the requests that are going to come through for your time. You know, with success becomes significant demands on your time. It makes being on time difficult, but it's still as critical as it was when you weren't as busy. So I can't wait to talk about that one. I'm glad we identified that during the interview. That's going to do it for this week's show, though. We'll leave it as a teaser. As a reminder, you can help support Beyond Clean by subscribing on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts, as well as Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or your favorite podcast application. You can also access bonus content for certain episodes by downloading our smartphone app for iPhone and Android. We'd certainly appreciate a rating or review because your feedback is important to the show. And I just want to remind you, if you have topics that you even think up while you're listening to the show, kind of like Hank and I have done a couple of times this season in just our closing or throughout the interview, we would love it if you sent us an email and said, this is something you haven't talked about. We want to hear about it, or just general feedback for us on how we can do better with the show and really deliver great educational value to you as the audience. Send an email to info@beyondclean.net. And on behalf of Hank and myself, thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean.